Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Whatever time you're catching me in this upload is alright. Happy Saturday to you guys. Happy Saturday. I learned how to schedule my uploads now. Hello to the upload world. But for the people who go live, they easy access. They could schedule their lives and bump bump bump. Now you can schedule your uploads. So since mine was taking so long, I just figured that out. I didn't realize it, and I just ran into it. So, if you're an uploader like I am, just check when you do your editing, and it gives you an option in the bottom when you're uploading. It tells you right there. I just always passed it for some reason. But anyways, let's get back to this. So as I was saying to you the other day, the commander that's occupying, not even a commander, the person that's occupying the White House right now, wants to send our children back. Now, he done went through a couple CDCs, a couple of, press people. He went through them all when they just showed a slight disagreement with him on his, idiocy. So, now he's fighting with Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci is like, look, okay, I know I was responsible for helping you murder 100,000 people. Let's stop this now. I'm tired. I don't want no more blood on my hands. Too late, too late, too late. So, because this is a millionaire, he wants at least 1,000,000 deaths, 1,000,000 bloodlets. However, so he do not agree with the CDC of their recommendation of keeping kids apart. We do days here, days there. He don't want none of that from the teachers, right? So he's saying, none, I don't want y'all to do none of that. So we saying like, oh well, so how are we supposed to teach the kids, with everybody in the classroom that wasn't even spacing apart anyways? What we gonna do? I don't know. Figure it out. But I don't want to give you any funding to help you clean the schools. Are they going to clean the schools? Where is this precaution that's going to be taken for the kids? And like you said, some is going to go home to parents who have one lung or parents who have medical reasons. What is going to happen to them? Because we're realizing kids are getting it. Blacks and Hispanics are 3 times to 6 times more likely to get it than their white counterpart. And theirs are fatal because they have pre-existing conditions, unlike their counterparts because of the race, that they are. Other medical stuff runs in that culture. So this is what I'm saying. Like, now you're fighting with the CDC and the CDC man that came out saying, no, we need this. Now, after Trombone, I won't say his name. I refuse to. I almost slipped up right there. After he said, no, 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 no. Now he's coming out saying, well, the kids must go back to school. Parents just have to know that an outbreak is going to happen. It's just going to happen, okay? Something that's fatal that there's no cure for. They won't have a cure till next year. But I want y'all to listen to this, news report right here. Because like I said, when does this end and when do we save our kids? Are you serious? This man is acting delirious. Now he want to attack the babies. It doesn't matter if they're not babies, young adults. I'm not talking about the dumb ones that was there in Florida. I don't care. I catch the corona. I catch it. I just want to party and have my, spring break. Not those. Those are the kids of the Karens out here that's throwing masks on the floor, telling you to take your mask off because you perpetrating the agenda. When they find out if you black or Hispanic, that Karen breathing in your face might be giving it to you. Okay? Because she'll be okay. She might just get a little cold, like, the 45 said. 99% of people just get a little light cold. He might be talking about his people, But check the CDC. Everything I tell you, I try to bring facts because I'm watching it. Plain view. People say don't watch the news. You got to watch the stuff that they really try to tell you. I watch things that people say from a month ago, and then a month later, I see it on the regular watered down news. And I'm like, what? It's been out a whole month. That's why I said I watch international news. That's how I found out about the corona, because I was watching news that was not of the United States, because they lie here. Certain places don't lie. Like CNN stepped their game up and they stopped trying to perpetrate a fraud. Like Fox is all his. That's all his channel. Everybody who watched that channel, those are the Karens. Those are his supporters. He even turned on them. But that's still not the same thing, because they're still kissing his end. But let me let y'all watch this. Y'all have a good one. Blessings and love to you and your family. Y'all keep safe out there and stay informed and educated. I love you all, and I try to bring you what I could bring. But I'm not telling you to change your mind or this is just what it is. You do your research too, because I could be slipping up and you could find something else and let me know. It's all about sharing information. It's not about bringing someone down and saying you better than someone else. It's just like, yo, let's inform each other, keep each other posted, because we all in this together. Love you all. Blessings and love to you and the family. Keep safe.
Maker BioNTech tells the Wall Street Journal that a COVID-19 vaccine could be ready by the end of the year. The German company partnered with Pfizer to develop it, but the company CEO says global immunity could take a decade. Our Elizabeth Cohen, our senior medical correspondent, is with me for more. What do they mean could take a decade? Does that mean to get a vaccine to be more, like close to, 99% effective?
No, what they mean by that, Poppy, is to get enough vaccine out there that we have what's called herd immunity. And herd immunity means that enough people are immune, either because they had COVID or because they got vaccinated for COVID, that it stops the spread of the disease. It is really unclear how long that's going to take. I will tell you, I was sort of surprised to hear him say that, because there are three numbers that you need to know, and we don't know any of them in order to make those conclusions. One, you need to know how contagious is this disease, and we don't exactly know that. Two, you need to know how effective the vaccine is. We're hoping for 90%, but we may have to settle for 50%. And three, we don't know how many people are willing to get it. So until you know those three numbers, and we don't know any of those three numbers, it's hard to predict when we'll reach, or if we'll reach, herd immunity.
Yeah, there's just so much that's unknown and hard to predict. You're right. One thing that was pretty shocking to hear overnight is that these doctors finding so many blood clots in so many of the organs of some of the patients who have died from COVID-19. I know there was concern about blood clots and heart attacks, etc. Does that teach us anything more about the virus?
It teaches us that blood clots may perhaps be more of an issue than we even thought. I mean, at first it was a complete surprise, or not a complete surprise, but it was pretty much a surprise that the blood clots were causing this many problems. Now with this study, this is autopsies looking at people who died after being infected with COVID, and they found not only clots in the large vessels, which they expected to find, but also clots in smaller vessels, and that there were clots in virtually every organ that they looked in. That is really a problem, because treating clots can be difficult. I mean, it's possible, but you give people drugs so that they won't clot as much, but then you worry that they're going to bleed out. So there's this delicate balance in treating this issue, and this blood clot issue really, Poppy, is sort of a signature issue of COVID. It happens in other diseases, but it really seems to happen in this infection much more.
It really does, Elizabeth. Thanks for the reporting. We appreciate it. Our Dr. Sanjay Gupta joins me now to talk about all of this. Good morning. Good to have you back.
Good morning. Thank you.
Let's just, if we could, start on schools, Sanjay, and because you guys did that great town hall last night, and we heard from Dr. Redfield talking about schools. But the fact that he is saying now that it is to the public health benefit. If you weigh the pros and cons, he seems to be saying, the benefit outweighs the downside of having kids in school nationally and in school physically in the fall.
Yeah, and look, I'm a parent here, so I'll put on the parent hat. You are as well for a second.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense, obviously, and the American Academy of Pediatrics a few days ago said the same thing, that the benefit of having kids physically in school is obvious. It's important for their development. I think, but it's got to be taken in the context of this pandemic. If you look at the guidance that the CDC put out, and we can put some of that up for people to see, most people who've been following the story of coronavirus virus at all, these recommendations will make sense, right? You're encouraging hand washing, masks, cloth masks, trying to do everything you can to not have kids congregate and stuff like that, modifying seating layouts, whatever it may be. That's the goal, is to make it harder for the virus to jump from person to person. I think there's a few issues here. One is that what is going to happen in these schools if you do get a significant outbreak, right? You can open the schools up, but what is the actual plan in place, the triggers, if you will, if you start to see significant disease, whether people are symptomatic or not? Number two is, there's a lot of data out there, Poppy. I found this interesting even over the last couple of days going through this data about how this virus transmits among adults. But if you really look at the data, there's not as much data about how it transmits among kids. Kids do seem to be more insulated from this. They don't seem to get as sick. We know that. That's good news. But kids have largely been home since March in this country, especially little kids. So what do we really know about their ability to transmit the virus? The answer is not much. I mean, some of the largest studies of, tens of thousands of people will only have, 20, 30 kids included in those studies. So we really don't know. And we got to find out the answer to that. And then I think finally, this idea ultimately of what is the impact of school closures overall on a pandemic. Closing theaters does this much. If you have 100%, closing theaters does 5%. Closing stadium events does 10%. Churches, 10%. What is schools? And they say the schools are 2 to 4%, roughly, of the impact of slowing down the trajectory of a pandemic. That's a modeling, again, based on, the little data that we have. But I think you have to take this all in context.
You're right, we do. In terms of knowing what opening schools does, again, for a pandemic, the president, you saw his tweet earlier this week, pointing to models in Europe, I think the Netherlands, Germany, et cetera, for opening schools, and he says there's been no problem. Is that true? And if it is that a model that the U.S. should look for, or is it just really not apples to apples, given what we're seeing happen right now in this country with COVID?
Yeah, unfortunately, Poppy, it's not apples to apples, and for a very simple reason, and that is that we have a lot more virus circulating here in the United States. So, 2 to 4% of a very small number of, 100 new infections a day is going to be 2 to 4 infections a day. But when you're starting to look at some of these states where you're getting, thousands of new infections, newly diagnosed infections a day, all of a sudden, this impact of schools may be much larger. Shutting down schools may have a much greater impact as a result.
Yep.
And so every community has to sort of evaluate this side by side. I live here in Georgia. The numbers have been going up pretty steadily. I'm going to spend time with my kids' school administrators later today to get a better idea. What is the plan here? Is Georgia going to be different than New York, for example, where you are? So the communities are going to have to be taken separately and also evaluated by this total number of new infections.
I think every single parent in this country has to get ready for a real sort of start-stop kind of fall and winter. Your kid's in school one day, they're not in school the next day, and that's very hard to do when it comes to childcare for working parents. Finally,
Yes,
4th of July. So cases went up after the Memorial Day, and 4th of July, a lot of people got together and had barbecues and went to the beach. So what are we going to see maybe a week from now?
Yeah, Chris Murray, who's sort of the architect of these models coming out of the University of Washington, one of the things they've predicated those models on is just mobility. They got anonymous cell phone data trying to figure out how mobile did people become as you started to restrict, to open up the stay-at-home orders, and are people actually moving around more. So let's take a look at these graphs. It's very interesting to me, and specifically looking at certain areas and comparing Memorial Day to July 4th, for example, and looking at a few cities. Charleston, South Carolina, well, it turns out is one of the most popular cities that people visited over the weekend. And look there, Poppy, more people visited July 4th weekend than they did Memorial Day weekend. So, things were just starting to open up Memorial Day weekend, and now by July, people are visiting at, basically regular rates of visitation. This is going to be an issue because you see more exposure as a result of that. We know that. And Poppy, it's predictable that a couple of weeks from now, more hospitalizations, and then sadly, a couple of weeks after that, more deaths. The
vote right now tonight is on the verge of topping 133,000 people dead. And Dr. Anthony Fauci tonight telling it like it is.
As a country, when you compare us to other countries, I don't think you can say we're doing great. I mean, we're just not.
or just not? It is a far cry from what we are hearing from the President of the United States.
We've done a great job, whether it's ventilators or anything you want to look at, testing. We test so many people that we have more cases.
All right, more on his testing point in just a moment, because it's factually inaccurate, the point he's making. The truth is, no matter how great Trump says the United States is doing, the numbers don't lie. So take a look at this. We're going to show you the numbers. In just 4 weeks in the United States of America, we have gone from 2 million to 3 million coronavirus cases. We are now at our highest 7-day average of cases since the beginning of the pandemic. And the crucial way to look at this is also the rate of positive infections. That has also gone up. So for every group of people you test, what percent of them are positive? That's an indication of how widely and quickly the virus is spreading. According to that 7-day average, we are now at 8.2% positivity. It is doubled, up from 4.4% just 1 month ago. WHO says you need to be south of 5. We have doubled to more than 8. And as the number of cases rise, so too is the amount of time people are waiting to get tested. So people still can't get the tests. Remember these images back in March, people waiting hours to get tested across this country? We are again now seeing long lines outside testing places. In some places, people are waiting 4 to 5 hours. And on the front lines, once again, the same crisis that we saw when this hit the Northeast. Now a shortage of masks, gowns, face shields, and gloves. And in Houston, doctors at one hospital reportedly being told to reuse single-use N95 masks for up to 15 days as they treat coronavirus patients. And the nation's largest organization of registered nurses found in late June that 85% of its members had been forced to reuse disposable N95 masks while treating coronavirus patients. I sound frustrated because I am. I mean, this is deja vu. We've been there before. This wasn't supposed to happen again. And these images mirror what we saw months ago at the height of the pandemic in New York City. Patients being treated in tents because hospitals were overflowing. And when it comes to hospitalizations, by the way, the White House is trying to say, don't worry about those numbers going up. There's no there. Here's the argument.
Hospitalizations in the country are up 50% since mid-June. How can the president say that the country is in good shape right now?
So I would note with hospitalizations, in a lot of these hospitals, I spoke with Dr. Birx this morning, about 10 to 40% in the hospitals reaching high capacity are COVID. So a lot of hospitalizations aren't pertaining to COVID. What I would also note, and I'm glad...
Hospitalizations is not because of COVID?
Well, a lot of it is elective surgeries and other surgeries that have opened up.
So elective surgeries, that is the line from the White House. It is not true. So let's just take the numbers again. We'll show you Texas, which hit a record in deaths in a single day today. Look at the spike in COVID hospitalizations. COVID, coronavirus, not elective surgery. Less than 2,000 in early April, nearly 10,000 now. That is not elective surgery. Hospitals are strained in many places, and states are being told they may need to shut down again. And yet the president says he disagrees with Dr. Fauci when Dr. Fauci says the United States is knee-deep in the crisis. You know, I actually talked to the doctor who helped eradicate smallpox, and he told me that Fauci, who we all know is very conservative, didn't even go far enough on this one.
We're not knee-deep. We're hip-deep, and if we don't do something dramatically, we'll soon be neck-deep.
The president just denies that. He wants you to think, and you heard him at the beginning, right? I said I was going to get back to this, that the whole reason that we're seeing this increase in cases is because we are testing more people. He keeps saying that. So for those of you who are tempted to believe him, let me explain why this is wrong. So first of all, he said today, for the 100th time, the reason we show so many cases compared to other countries that haven't done nearly as well as we have is that our testing is much bigger and better. Well, for the 100th time, this is false. It is not because of testing. Here are the numbers. Nationwide testing in the United States of America up by 7% over the past week. Cases over that time up by 24%. So that's nationwide, okay? He's wrong. How about states with the highest cases? Well, let me show you Arizona. Back on June 7th, Arizona tested 14,100 people. The number of positive tests were just over 1,500. Today, they tested 12,000 people. The number of positive tests, 3,500. In English, fewer tests, more cases. Caitlin Collins is out front live at the White House tonight. Caitlin, Dr. Fauci, again, painting a very different picture of the situation than the president, and the president's, what he says simply does not align with the facts.
Yeah, and the president not only is trying to portray this optimistic portrait of what is going on, he wants to tell few things that aren't actually happening, like how he is with the testing numbers and saying that if we tested half the people, we'd have half the cases, but also on so many other things. And that's why you've seen the president often be at odds with Dr. Fauci, who not only focusing on just the optimistic stuff, he's giving people this realistic view of actually what's going on in the country. And so the question is, how is the president breaking with one medical expert, but it's also several others as well, Aaron, including the CDC director, Robert Redfield, who we are still having all of this confusion about what their guidance is going to be on reopening schools. And we are just weeks away from some teachers actually going back to schools. You saw Dr. Redfield this morning in an interview saying they're actually not going to be changing that CDC guidance after there was confusion yesterday about whether or not they were. He now says they're only going to issue additional information. And so the question of how that squares with the president complaining about the CDC guidance as it was explained by the White House today by saying, well, they don't have to subscribe to everything that's in the guidance, these schools, because it's just that, guidance. But Aaron, the problem with that is, and the president saying, well, you have to all reopen, is they are basically telling these schools, it's up to you to decide how to reopen and how to socially distance your children and your students, but we're going to tell you when to reopen, and they say that has to be now, and they want everyone back in the classrooms, not just, a staggered schedule or some of these limited classrooms like we've seen suggested.
All right, Caitlin, thank you very much. I want to go now to Dr. Sanjay Gupta, our chief medical correspondent, and Dr. Ashish Jha, the director of the Harvard Global Health Institute. So, Sanjay, for the 100th time, the president says that the increase in cases is due to the United States doing better than any other country on testing. So for the 100th time, the facts, of course, do not show that, right? Cases are going up more quickly than tests. And in fact, in some of the hotspots, testing has gone down as cases have gone up.
And hospitalizations have gone up as well, right? So even if you say, hey, look, the testing is, if you buy into that narrative, which is absolutely not true for all the reasons you mentioned, you're also seeing an increase in hospitalizations. If you look at the trend map here, I think this is instructive. See sort of what's happened since the beginning of this pandemic here in the United States. You'll see that the numbers sort of, they came to their lowest point, I think, right around June 1st. And at that point, we had some 17,000 people who became infected on that day and newly. And then really since then, for the last, 6 weeks now, 5.5 weeks, the numbers have been going up, and they've obviously surpassed the highest point from before. So, things are clearly going in the wrong direction. And at this idea that, hey, it's because we're testing more, not acknowledging the problem as a result, I'm worried we're not going to be able to fix it. How do we fix a problem that we're not even acknowledging?
Right. Well, and the president far from acknowledges it, Dr. Jha, right? So first they're trying to say there's no hospital issue because people are going back for elective surgeries, which just completely ignores the point that COVID hospitalizations have been surging for COVID, not for elective surgeries. And yet, we from time and time again, we hear the president giving a different reality. Here's just a few examples.
We understand the disease. We've learned the virus is abating, and the crisis is being handled. We're putting out the fires. We did it right. We saved millions of lives by what we did.
So what do you say, Dr. Jha, when the president of the United States says the numbers are only going up today because of testing?
Yeah, so, it's sort of like we're in the middle of a hurricane and our political leaders are saying it's sunny and warm outside and it's not raining. It's sort of hard to know where to begin, but so let's just do a few fact checks. We have not done more testing than anybody else in the world. China's done much more testing than us. On a per capita basis, lots of countries have done more tests. Russia has done more tests per capita than we have. This is just silliness. This is not about testing. Every doctor, every public health person understands that what we have is large outbreaks of this disease happening in large parts of our country. Hospitalizations are going up, and in those states, deaths are going up. People are dying of this disease. There are more people dying of this disease now than there were 2 weeks ago and 4 weeks ago in the hotspot states. This is incontrovertible. The debate and discussion we need to be having is what do we do about it? How do we protect lives? How do we open up our economy? And not the stuff about are we doing more testing than anybody else? We're just not.
We
is due to report to prison next week for lying to Congress and witness tampering for a stay of more than 3 years. But the president just commuted his sentence of his longtime confidant, so he's not going to go to prison at all. White House calling him a victim of the Russia hoax tonight. I want to go back to Caitlin Collins at the White House for details. So what more do we know about the decision? I mean, it's been a long time coming and a lot of hints about it. When was it made? Do we know how it was made?
There have been a lot of hints about it, but I do want to note there has been some really serious internal division over whether the president should go forward with this. I mean, even yesterday, people were raising the prospect of the president not following through because he is getting advice saying that it is going to hurt him politically. People were worried about the repercussions of that, Anderson. But then, of course, you also had Stone's allies who were calling the president saying, look at these devastating legal fees he's facing, and really trying to appeal to the president to pardon his longtime friend by saying, this attack on Stone is an attack on you. And people started to say that's the way the president saw it. And so, you saw it the day that Roger Stone was sentenced. The president was speaking to a group of people who had been incarcerated and then changed their lives. And he started going off about the justice system. So that's how he's been viewing this. And of course, this is how it culminated today as the president was going to Florida. He spoke with Roger Stone today. It was a pretty brief conversation, we're told. And then he let him know that he was going to be commuting his sentence. And we're told by people close to Roger Stone that he had been a little bit nervous, actually, Anderson, because it's Donald Trump, he's unpredictable, and he wasn't completely sure what the president was going to do, and they had not been speaking. They were really speaking through intermediaries at the time, and though, of course, now he has used the power of his office to help his friend out.
And I mean, the way this president has used executive clemency before for other allies, I mean, did anyone really think he would let Roger Stone go to prison? I mean, there really was some belief that he might?
I think there was belief that there was reluctance on the president's part to do it. I mean, he and Roger Stone, they go way back. They've known each other since the 80s. They met through Roy Cohn, of course, the president's former attorney that he still talks about so much. But also remember, he fired Roger Stone from his campaign, he claimed, and then Roger Stone claimed he quit because he said Roger Stone was publicity seeking. So they do have this back and forth relationship. And, the president doesn't like to deal with things directly. He likes to do so indirectly. So he knows that by commuting this sentence, the blame and the responsibility goes to President Trump himself. And I think there are people inside the White House who were trying to appeal to him to get him to not to do it, though, of course, they were not successful.
Yeah. Caitlin Collins, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Legal perspective now from our chief legal analyst and former federal prosecutor, Jeff Toobin. Also, our senior legal analyst, Brie Berar, former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. So, Jeff, obviously the president's prerogative. What do you make of it, though?
Well, it's the three words that sum up the Trump presidency: shocking but not surprising. I guess that's 4 words. This is the most corrupt and cronyistic act in perhaps all of recent history. Richard Nixon, at the height of Watergate, never pardoned or commuted the sentences of any of the people involved in Watergate. He thought he could never get away with it. But our standards have sunk so low that the president could reach out to someone who is convicted of a crime that, everyone who's convicted of that crime goes to prison. He's sentenced to 40 months. He's going to do no time for the only reason that he's the president's friend. That is not how the American judicial system is supposed to work, and it is not how it has worked historically, even with friends of the president who get arrested.
The president said, right before he cleared peaceful protesters, that he's, our law and order president. Is this law and order?
No, it is not. I mean, look, as a technical matter, one of the most unfettered powers that any president has is the power of the pardon. It's unreviewable. You can't appeal to any court. But law and order means something more than, technical power and authority that you have. And I agree with what Jeffrey said about how corrupt an act it is. Maybe not a prosecutable act, although some people think it might be. Earlier today, Roger Stone said to a journalist, I'm really hoping for a pardon or some clemency. And one of the reasons for that is I could have turned on the president, and I didn't. And there was a lot of pressure for me to do so, and I would have made things easier for myself if I had, which is an astonishing statement and an admission of something. Ordinarily, if it were you or me or Jeff Toobin, hopefully all upstanding citizens who haven't broken the law, and some random person said, I was under pressure to turn on one of you, we might say, go ahead. What are you going to say? The fact that Roger Stone said, I resisted pressure to turn on the president is essentially an admission that he was in a position to implicate the president in misconduct or wrongdoing. And as a big wet kiss, AKA big favor, to Roger Stone, the president commuted his sentence. He's permitted to do it. There's nothing you can do about it because it's in the Constitution and there's wide latitude for him. But it is something that should, I think, astonish every American, even after a series of bits of conduct by the president that are astonishing. This is up there.
And Jeff, I mean, you mentioned that the prison time people convicted of crimes Stone was found guilty of usually get. Can you just remind everyone what those crimes were? What it was that he did?
He was charged with 7 counts of crimes related to the Mueller investigation. The first crime was obstruction of justice, 5 crimes of lying to Congress, and 1 crime of witness intimidation, threatening in effect to kill a witness and perhaps his dog, who were going to testify against him. This was no joke. Even William Barr, who was hardly, critical of the president, said he thought it was a legitimate prosecution. This is something that's just simply not done by American presidents. They don't pardon or commute sentences of people who are close to them, who are about to go to prison. It just does not happen until this president. And, we're going to see if anyone cares.
It's also somebody who is accused of doing something to benefit the president. I mean, that it's not just the president pardoning somebody who is a wealthy donor or, this is somebody who seems to be covering for the president.
Yeah, look, it's a combination of things, all of which really sort of mark this in muck. It's someone who's an associate of the president that he got involved with, who committed crimes that were intended to protect the president, and then who looks like he did a favor for the president by not opening his mouth and keeping his mouth shut, and the president using one of the most extraordinary powers that the chief executive has to then save that person. So all across the board, it's the kind of thing that no one contemplated, I think, the pardon power to allow. And further to Jeffrey's point, you have the parallel case of Michael Flynn, where the Justice Department did an extraordinary thing and has moved to dismiss that case. So we know if the Justice Department thinks that someone was wrongly investigated and prosecuted and convicted, they will go so far as to move to dismiss the case even after conviction by guilty plea. And Bill Barr did not do that here, even though he intervened in what I think was also an inappropriate way and showed a lack of independence on the part of the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., moved only to reduce the sentencing recommendation. But even in the case of Roger Stone, this person who people think is not independent from the president, the Attorney General of the United States, did not think to go so far as to say this was an improper prosecution or an improper conviction and that jail time was appropriate. That shows you how far, even further, the conduct of the president is with respect to someone who's close to him.
I will suggest, too, if this was, if we were watching this happen in some other country and you look at it and you say, oh, wait, here's a leader who's helping out his criminal pals while trying to get his political opponents investigated, that's what happens in authoritarian countries. It's what happens in, places where there's ruling families. And in this case, I guess there is, because they're...
It's one of the signatures of authoritarian countries that they control the judicial system to favor their friends. That is what authoritarianism means in how countries are governed. That's how we know the difference between corrupt countries and countries where the rule of law matters. Because in corrupt countries, the people who are close to the president don't get treated like everyone else. They don't get punished or prosecuted when they violate the law. And that is precisely what...
And Jeff's screen froze there. Jeff Toobin, thanks very much. Preet Bharara as well.
Fauci says he has not personally briefed the president in 2 months or even seen him since the beginning of June, despite the U.S. hitting a record number of cases. And during this deadly pandemic, the president is calling into his favorite channel to rail against his perceived political enemies. And as CNN's Jeremy Diamond reports, boasting about acing a cognitive test.
I proved I was all there because I aced it.
As the pandemic rages on, President Trump is focused on dismissing questions about his mental acuity, claiming he recently aced a cognitive test.
Hey, buddy.
As he called into question Joe Biden's mental fitness.
Took it at Walter Reed Medical Center in front of doctors, and they were very surprised. They said that's an unbelievable thing.
The White House would not say when he took the test or provide any details. But CNN previously reported Trump took the Montreal Cognitive Assessment in 2018, scoring highly on a test that includes simple memory and mental tasks, which only indicates he is not suffering any mild cognitive dysfunction. Today, Trump's spending the day in the country's biggest coronavirus hotspot, but his trip to Florida has nothing to do with the pandemic. Instead, Trump appears focused on shoring up his re-election prospects in this critical battleground state, posing with seized drugs, accusing his Democratic rival of supporting socialism, and attending a high-dollar fundraiser. But his chances at a second term may be tied to the crisis he is all but ignoring. A new poll revealing that just 1/3 of Americans approve of Trump's handling of the pandemic, down from 41% just 3 weeks ago. Even Republicans are starting to lose faith. Support for Trump's handling of coronavirus dipping from 90 to 78% in his own party.
Dr. Fauci's a nice man, but he's made a lot of mistakes. Very difficult.
Meanwhile, the president is locked in an increasingly public feud with the country's most trusted doctor, whose assessment of the surge in coronavirus cases is growing gloomier, while the president tries to spin a rosier version of reality.
We have tested almost 40 million people. By so doing, we show cases, 99% of which are totally harmless.
Dr. Fauci, who says he hasn't seen Trump in more than 5 weeks, making clear that's not true, telling the Financial Times, "What I think happened is that someone told him that the general mortality is about 1%, and he interpreted, therefore, that 99% is not a problem, when that's obviously not the case." And Pam, as you know, President Trump has stubbornly refused to wear a mask in public, even mocking his rival Joe Biden for doing so. We're expecting the president, though, tomorrow to take a step in the other direction. He is expected to wear a mask when he visits Walter Reed National Military Medical Center tomorrow, and I'm told that he will be photographed wearing one. That comes after a private and quite quiet lobbying campaign by some White House aides and campaign officials to urge the president to wear a mask to show his supporters that it's okay to do that. We know that a number of Republican officials have tried recently to depoliticize mask wearing, and now the question is whether the president, in wearing this mask tomorrow, whether that's going to do anything to change it after all these weeks during which he's downplayed this effective public health initiative.
Back with me now to discuss all of this, CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta and CNN political director Test. And what does it mean exactly to ace it?
Right. Well, that's not a term that I think most the medical community would use to describe doing well on the test. It's not like the SAT or something, or a test that you take in school. It's more of a screening test. We can show you some of the types of questions that are asked here. It's trying to find whether someone is suffering from some cognitive dysfunction that they themselves may not recognize. So the top of the test, you get a sort of sense. The 1 goes to the A, the 2 is going to go to the B, and 3 is going to go to the C. Can you draw a cube? Can you draw the face of a clock, a certain time? Can you identify animals? I mean, it's a pretty basic test, and it's really more of a screening test. So, when we're talking about trying to evaluate someone's cognitive function, it's usually pretty involved, right? There may be imaging, there may be blood work, there may be more detailed neurological assessment. This is sort of a screening test. So it sounds like you got a perfect score on it, but again, you can see the sorts of questions on there. If somebody had a significant problem, it would probably screen that, it would be a screening test and sort of call for more sophisticated testing. I don't even know which test he's talking about because he says it was a recent test. Is this a 2018 test?
Right. Yeah.
Is this something that happened in 2019? He went to Walter Reed in November of 2019. That was sort of an unplanned visit.
Mm-hmm.
Was he getting a cognitive workup at that point? If so, why? Why there versus the White House? There's all sorts of questions more than answers, after this comment.
Absolutely, and the White House isn't providing any clarification on whether or not how recent this test was. And just to be clear, so on the test we're talking about in 2018, if you get a perfect score, that wouldn't necessarily, in your view, be an unbelievable thing or something that would rarely happen, as the president tried to portray it. Just to be clear.
Yeah, and you could see the nature of the questions there. Can you identify a camel? Can you identify a lion? Can you say that A goes to 1? I mean, it's not a hard test. If somebody wasn't doing well on that or was getting things wrong, that would be a cause for concern. Most people should get those types of questions.
Okay, so let's talk about this polling, David. The polling out today showing 2/3 of Americans disapprove of the president's handling of coronavirus. How concerning is that to the White House, to the president?
In a word, very. And take a look, not just this is the highest disapproval, that 67% that we've seen on his handling of this major issue, top of mind for voters, but look at the trend, Pam. I mean, it goes from 58% disapproval in June, and it jumps up 9 points to 67%. That's one big concern. It's also the partisan breakdown. The president is losing his own Republicans on this. In June, he had 90% of approval among Republicans for his handling of the virus. It's down 12 points to 78%, and you see he's bleeding even more with independents from 40% now all the way down to 26%. These are some of the most alarming poll numbers that the president has seen, and he has not been seeing great poll numbers in these last several weeks.
And what's interesting is that, the president's strategy seems to be right now, look, there's nothing to see here. Things are getting better with coronavirus. But if you look at these poll numbers, that messaging doesn't appear to be working in his favor, particularly, as you pointed out, among Republicans. And where are Americans as a whole on the pace of reopenings in the U.S.?
Again, this is one poll, this ABC News Ipsos poll out today. We'll look to see as other polls come out. But right now, 59% of Americans say that reopening the economy is happening too quickly. Only 15% say it's too slowly. About a quarter say it's the right pace. But you're talking about nearly 6 in 10 Americans. That's a pretty healthy majority in a divided universe that we live in that says the reopening is happening too quickly.
All right. Thank you so much, David Chalian, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. I appreciate it.